So when I start to think about this stuff, it goes both ways. Sometimes I just think, well, all this stuff, yeah, it's really easy, really straightforward. It just makes perfectly clear conceptual sense. And then other times I catch myself and find myself almost unable to make sense of what it is that's going on. It often depends on what I'm doing at the time. So if I'm playing with my daughter, then sometimes this stuff just makes no sense. But yeah. I guess the best way to try and sort of explain the way that philosophers might think about this sort of thing would be to sketch the two broad ways in which the categories of theory of time tend to be sketched. So the first sort of theory that you tend to get is the A theory of time, following on from some terms given to us by a chap called John Ellis McTaggart in 1908. And according to McTaggart, the A series is the series of events running from future to present to past. So we might say that the Battle of Hastings was future, then it became present, then it became past. And of course, whether something is future, present or past changes constantly over time. So you get this kind of inbuilt dynamism to time and temporal passage. And that seems very intuitive. The other theory of time that philosophers like to opt for is a B theory of time. And according to B theorists, events in time are simply earlier than or later than one another. Now obviously that, if you think about events in time just being earlier than or later than one another, you don't get the same kind of change from future to present to past that you would if you bought into the A series. The view that I spend a lot of my research looking at is an A-theoretic view. It's not to say that I think this particular A-theoretic view is right, but it is the view that's caught my attention quite a lot. And this is a presentist view, according to which only present objects exist. So if you can imagine a timeline, a historical timeline, with all of the events in time spread out along it, that you might think is akin to treating time a bit like a dimension. It's a structured thing, spread out, filling some kind of volume. Well, according to the presentist, that's not quite the right way to think about time. What you should think about is, rather than a timeline, you should think of time as a single point, tracing through those distinct events. And once that point passes those events, or once those events have happened, those events cease to exist. So a kind of a crude way of describing, I think, if you've got the dimensional view, time is just a dimension, it's a bit like a line. On the other view, the presentist view, time's like a dot tracing through those different events. There are particular versions of presentism that will say that events in time are always there and you have this moving spotlight that passes through things. It tends to actually get called a moving spotlight view for some obvious reasons. But for the presentist, past and future are simply no part of reality. So when I wave my hand, I destroy what used to exist, and I make some new thing come into existence. The passage of time is a continual, it's continually destroying and creating new states of affairs. As has been described so far in the literature by presentists, the great strength of presentists, the presentist view, is that it preserves a lot of our common sense judgments about reality. For instance, it seems pretty obvious, so says the presentist, that dinosaurs don't exist. Nothing could be more obvious to the man on the street, they say. Well, look, if you're a non-presentist, you do think that the dinosaurs exist. They just exist in a particular temporal direction, if you will. And that's not very intuitive. That doesn't preserve our intuitions about the way that time is. So the presentist says, look, real strength of my view, dinosaurs don't exist. Mars outposts in 3021 don't exist, right? They will, and the dinosaurs have existed, but that's not the same thing. The great weakness of presentism, and it's a biggie, is that it seems to be incompatible with the special theory of relativity. So, according to the presentist, there is a single set of objects that exist at any one moment. Every object that exists presently. Now, according to the special theory of relativity, or at least the way that it typically gets interpreted, what you perceive as being simultaneous with you will depend on how fast you're travelling. So you have different inertial frames of reference, and if I'm travelling at great speed with respect to you, or great velocity with respect to you, I might see an explosion, two explosions that in your frame of reference appear simultaneous. It might appear to me that one of those occurs before one of the others. And so the natural interpretation of the special theory of relativity is to say, look, simultaneity isn't absolute. You don't just get that single slice of events. And of course, presentism says that you do. And that's what you might describe as a sizable weakness
it is,
of presentism.
That seems like a deal breaker to me.
Yeah, it is. And this is the reason that I say I'm not a presentist. I'm very interested in presentism, and it's a view that I've looked to defend from other objections and to think about. One of the things that I've got that interests me, particularly about this debate between the presentist and the kind of the orthodox scientific view, is if and how a philosophical argument might overturn a particular scientific theory. So the default setting is to say the special theory of relativity contradicts presentism, therefore presentism is false. Now I've got no problem with that as a starting point. But then the question is, well, okay, suppose we start there. Why can't the presentist modify the special theory of relativity? Why can't they dispute the interpretation of the special theory of relativity? Now, maybe there are good reasons that they can't do that, but that question strikes me as a really interesting one, and that's one of the reasons I get interested in this part of the debate. There are kind of hybrid views or mixed views that get kicked about. One of these is the growing block theory of time. Again, growing block being a kind of a metaphor for what goes on. It sometimes gets described as being a version of the A theory, but not always, so I'm a little cautious about describing it in that way. But the basic idea of the growing block theory is to say that whereas the B theorist tends to say that the past, present and future are all equally real, the growing block theorist says, well, the past exists and is real, and the present is, and think of it like a block, and over time this block is steadily growing and being added to. I think the big question in the philosophy of time at the moment, or at least it has been quite recently, is how the presentist deals with a particular problem. So suppose you think that only present objects exist. We'll assume presentism for the time being. Okay, there's another philosophical hypothesis that gets people quite excited, and this is the truthmaker principle. And the truthmaker principle, very briefly, says that for every true claim that you want to make about reality, something must exist that makes it true. So if I want to say to you, I'm wearing a shirt, and that's true, I have to tell you what the truthmaker is. And in this case, it's really easy, it's just my shirt. But now be a presentist and say only present objects exist. You want to say it's true that there were dinosaurs, right? We want to say that that's true. Well, what makes it true? You would naturally say existing dinosaurs make it true. But of course, the presentist denies that dinosaurs exist. And so what the presentist then needs to do is one of two things. They need to either find a reason to and a way of modifying truthmaker theory, or they need to find some other truthmaker to make true or talk about the past. As far as I'm concerned, the thing that all philosophers look for, and so would quest for, and so the great discovery would be, is a really good argument. I think that's our bread and butter. And so to do it really well, to come up with a really excellent argument that persuaded people of some new view or of some position, that had premises that you just simply couldn't find it within yourself to dispute, that was logically tight, that would be the discovery. That would be what would be really, really interesting. So when I say to someone what it is that I do, and we talk about this, the typical reaction is, how interesting. And then there's a pause or a silence, and then someone normally laughs and said, well, that killed the conversation, didn't it? So yes, saying that you do the philosophy of time for a living is it's a great way to kill conversations with people.
Do you wear a watch, by the way?
I do, yeah.
Let's see it.
Yeah.
Let's have a look.
Yeah.
What time is it?
I reckon it's about 20 to 12.